Know Thyself is dedicated to the exploration of the most rewarding task an individual can ever embark on, the journey to find oneself. This is the Know Thyself podcast. All right, welcome to the Know Thyself podcast. Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you.
All right, well then I'm with Daniel right now.
Coming live from the apocalypse. Good to see you, Eduardo.
And I'm Eduardo. And hey, man, I know we were just having a nice long conversation about the continuation of the previous recording that we had. I think what you were saying is like a really good idea in terms of how we go about certain conversations and how we layer them. Mm-hmm. I listened to a really good episode of, I think it's Rick Rubin, just talking about the creative process. And I don't know who was interviewing him. It might have been Rogan, it might have been Friedman, it might have been other people, but these snippets that I've heard him talk about just kind of remind me of the conversations we have, offline. And then you're like, hey, we should have recorded that. And I'm like, yeah, there's just so much happening that influences our day to day and also like how we do these things. And so I'm always excited to talk to you about what ideas you might have about it and what we can do more authentically for the people who enjoy listening to, how we feel about these topics and how we move through life, understanding these topics,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there has been this unique new relationship that I think you and I are learning the dance of between like action and non-action. And, one thing that has been such a beautiful process through these conversations that we've had over the last 3 years is we've really fortified a common language together between you and I, the audience. And that common language is how we identify and explore these esoteric principles together. And so the more we add to our language, the deeper our communication could get. And so it's interesting now approaching subjects because we can kind of tie in everything that we've spoken about. When you're talking about astrology, you kind of have to start talking about alchemy because it corresponds to that principle. It corresponds to that esoteric science. And, we like kind of discussed this offline recently of, like when we broke down the movie Pinocchio, that was 4 episodes long. And we really, in the 4th episode, kind of felt like we kind of turned up the speed a little bit just to close that circuit because we were like, are we speaking too much about it? But it was so relatable to every other subject that you and I have had a conversation about. And we were able to, identify it. And we were able to create more data points so we could see more of these expressions of the universal life force making itself present in this 5-sense reality. And I think that that's part of the evolution that we're kind of experiencing together in this like death and this rebirth as we even approach like the next topic that we're looking at, which is the Chariot card. It's going to be a lot harder to contain these archetypes and these principles into one episode. And so learning how to navigate it, this whole process of doing this podcast, bringing our active awareness to the true reality that we're operating in, understanding the cosmic classroom and its relationship as like the mirage of the carnal carnival, right? Well, everybody that explores this information truly brings in an intensification of the alchemical transmutation. And that is something that like is undeniable in you and I, And so even as we're kind of going through this process, we're all going through such independent evolution that, we even kind of spoke about it recently of like, even when you and I see each other, sometimes it's like 2 weeks apart, but it's like we're in a stream and it's a new stream and we're both new men because we've gone through so much compounded evolution by bringing our awareness to this and also bringing our, the aspect and the acceptance that with us speaking about this, with us, discussing these principles, we are tested and we are brought into the forefront of our reality to say like, hey, you talk the talk, but can you walk the walk? And so I think it's just been one of the things that we were going to kind of talk about, I know today, and just kind of have an open conversation is the subjective experience in this objective reality. Aligning your perspective to truth and the unique experiences that come from that. We kind of have this desire to feel the real. And then the universe is like, okay, well then you're going to feel the real. You're going to have some real feels. You're actually going to open up yourself to these higher connections. But to do that, you have to do healing. And so, on top of the healing, on top of the relationship changes that we've had to make to experiences and attachments and everything else in between, it's just been a very unique thing to even observe from like an outsider's viewpoint of the evolution of this. And it's just so interesting of how like it is going to get harder to speak about things in their isolated study, because we're really connecting to this information as a complete network. And we're really starting to see how the esoteric really is just the golden thread that ties all subjects together. Does that make sense? Does that resonate with you?
It does resonate with me. I like that you spoke of two things that really kind of hit a few points in my mind. One is aligning yourself to truth. I always like when you say that. But then the golden thread that all connects us. And I think that those two things, no matter how much information you take in, I think no matter how much information you want to learn about, whether it's, deeper meanings behind a philosophy or an approach to life, you're constantly tested almost like a magnetic force field. And that can come into you sort of like, when you feel like your moral compass goes off, you're like, hey, this is the wrong thing to do. I'm going to help this person in this event where they might be the weaker individual, and not weakness by, some kind of moment of taking advantage of a person, but some moment where you could take advantage of a person if you didn't have that moral compass and knew how to operate from a higher self in order to aid someone who you might find yourself being just like maybe in a few months and maybe in a few days away. And I know some people, they talk about the golden rule, but I think the essence of all those ideas of moral compass or doing the right thing, there'll never be an end to those tests. And I think how you apply your knowledge to them allows you to sort of navigate and move a little more slick of a manner. And I think people can notice that. And I think opportunities sort of lend themselves to you a little quicker, which then speeds the evolution of the process of you going through this life. I was thinking about how when we were younger, much younger, like when we were kids, and this can't be for everybody, but it was for me. You look at a year going by in terms of your school year, the grade you're in, and then the summer that comes. And every time that you come back from those forms of like measuring units of time, you realize very clearly where you've changed because the external reality is telling you so. It's like, hey, you're a little taller. Hey, you're in this class now. Hey, you don't have that teacher anymore you had that you were relying on. It's up to you this year to kind of like navigate through this teacher who's like not going to favor you or give you an easy pass. So you kind of have these moments where you're able to like look at yourself, evaluate that you're different, but even your friends don't have to like call you out on it, or family members, because they know based on this grade you're in or the things you're doing in terms of like outside of schooling or outside of like the norm that is measuring your growth. When you get to this point of still volunteering yourself, and to this point, I mean like older, out of this kind of like way of measuring your evolution, it kind of starts to blend super quickly. It blends very easily. And then people kind of don't know. And I know for myself, you kind of have these moments people talk about saying, kind of lost myself. Like, am I being the person that everyone sees? Or am I being the person who lives inside with that heart? The point being is this golden thread you talk about, or aligning yourself to truth, becomes more obvious, but the application to it becomes a little more, I wouldn't even say challenging, there's just so many things happening now where you're kind of like not able to look at yourself and say, well, what grade am I in, or what octave am I at? Or you're just having to operate pretty quickly with this magnetic intuition that's telling you like, this is a moment, either you take it or you don't, or this is something you should approach or not approach. And you kind of see the end results pretty effectively, pretty quickly, rather than like waiting to make tons of mistakes and be like, I should have done that differently. I don't know. I kind of went off on a different tangent, but my point being is like, you and I will always continue exploring these ideas of what makes that compass go, or what makes the magnetic force field move. And there's so many people before us that we talked about who kind of left blueprints or clues as to how to navigate through that. To your point of Pinocchio, it's like we started talking about something that we thought, oh, we'll get this done in an episode. And then we realized like the things that have been presented to us or the masses, or how it's done by entertainment, is leaving tons of clues, tons of blueprints. Well, we got to talk on that. We got to talk on that. So I do think our conversations will always go much deeper now, because we know what those things are. The more and more you and I evolve over time, it's just hard to catch them until you have a conversation that lingers too long on a topic, you know?
Absolutely. And, interesting thing you brought up about the relativity of time and our experience with it, because you're right. As a child, the year feels longer because you have like the initiation into a new grade, you have the graduation out of that grade, and then you experience summer. Like you're kind of more connected to like, it compartmentalizes the time a little bit. Cause I remember as a child asking my mom how old she was. And she was just like, well, Daniel, you shouldn't ask women that question. And it's always just like, okay, learning moment here. She said, 35. I just turned 35. 35 felt so far away from me as a child. You've been alive for 35 years. And it's really true. Like the years get shorter as you start to grow through this process. And a lot of it has to do with us kind of disconnecting from that inner child magical lens of how we are experiencing this reality, and kind of getting obviously like hypnotized by the motion, kind of getting like sucked into the carnal carnival. Our persona starts to develop. Our personality kind of comes out. We go through the process of adolescence where there's like this me moment, and we kind of do this whole thing just to kind of come back in and kind of, obviously like reconnect to that inner child, and like bring it into the future with us. But I love what you said about growth, because it is fascinating. For the first 18 years, the universe is showing you growth physically. You're actually like becoming taller, you're getting facial hair, things like the process of like maturity and puberty. And then you get to like 20 and you stop growing, but you're not supposed to stop growing. Like that energy that was moving out your body is now like coming back into you, into your consciousness. And it's just almost like, that inner awareness kind of opens up in the 20s when you really kind of start to become aware of this reality, and you can kind of take in even like more difficult concepts, because the energy that was growing your body is now forming to just like your awareness of yourself. And, this is also why the 20s can be a very depressing and deflating time, because of like all of that energy and that awareness that's coming in. But it's just so funny, for the first 18 years, the universe is showing you like, you're here to grow. You're here to grow. And then we get to 18 and we become stagnant a lot of times. And we because we're not growing physically, we think we're done. When really like we just went through the what is it? Kind of like we just kind of got the incorporation, and we just kind of went through that 12 steps of like what society is telling us is reality. Your real education starts truly when you like leave school. I mean, if you're in a true like education school based off of the trivium, you know that you're going to be forever a student. But in this like this outcome based education system we have here, it's just like, just get a good paying job, and then just like get hypnotized by the Netflix loop of like, are you still watching? And you're like, of course I'm still watching. It's a Sunday. I'm going to watch this all day, and we get like hypnotized right into the motion. It's just so fascinating that we're here to grow. The universe is growing around us and constantly evolving. And we are the species with the awareness of ourself in such a subjective way. But that also gives us the power to, negate that universal process of growth. And we can actually, we spoke about it before, but there's a lot of people that die in their 20s, but don't get buried until their 70s.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it about it. We talked about that, and well said with that last statement, because we've talked about that with the Dark Night of the Soul, and the processes of like what initiate you into taking a second look, and even a third look and a fourth. You're never really done exploring where there's room for growth, but it's up to you to sort of like be aware when it's coming around again. And I think that when your physical body stops growing, as you were saying, it is easy to kind of stay stuck or stagnant because you think, well, there's nothing more to explore. I kind of have it figured out. There's going to be some experiences, or some people subject themselves to really bad experiences also. You'll meet a lot of people in their early 20s to late 20s, and I don't blame them. I don't look at them and go, oh, you're doing something bad. I'm like, no, you're doing what you think you need to be doing in order to like maybe gain knowledge of some sort, or understand, the reciprocity, I can't say it, the repercussions of what's going to happen when you make a bad choice like this, and how it's going to rob you of time. But when you think you have enough time, you're willing to take that risk. And that could be just like, doing something out of line in terms of your love life, in terms of your job, in terms of your career, in terms of whatever it is that you chose to do. I don't blame people when they're like, oh, I was an idiot and I did these things that eventually I just deemed as mistakes. I admire when people are like, oh, I was just a crazy person in my 20s, but they have a smile on their face of like, but I knew what I was doing. Like, it wasn't the most beneficial, but as harmful as it might seem on paper, I kind of wanted that, and I wanted to see what the boundaries of life were. And so you're always trying to figure out how to grow. I think whether you're conscious of it or not conscious of it, I think that, eventually something's going to hit and you're going to go, oh, I need to learn from this. And then you take an active approach. Like, oftentimes I wonder who goes exploring these things. Who is interested in the tarot? Who's interested into astrology? Who's into mysticism? Who's into even, religion, and wasn't part of that religion or brought up on that religion? You know what I mean? I meet people often now in my 30s who they'll tell me what, their disposition in life is, or by religion. And then I'll ask if that's how they were brought up, and they'll say no. So obviously something happened on the way to this moment that made them find solidarity in it, or some kind of peace in it, because maybe there was total chaos on it. And how was that chaos brought on? Was it brought on by their physical environment, by their parents, or is it brought on by their own, inability to make decisions? Or there are people out there who are just like, I'm just going to put a blindfold on and point. And then it's like, oh, so that's how you ended up in Guam? Like, you ended up in Guam because of that? You're like, yeah, I put a blindfold on and just like pointed at a map. And you're like, wow, that's a major decision. However, like, did it benefit you? And people were like, yeah, yes and no. Or, oh my God, it changed everything. And then I'm like, oh, is this how you now approach all of life? So when you get into these topics, and one that I know we're going to get back to with the tarot, I always wonder what led someone to that. And it doesn't have to be like a crazy life-changing experience that got them there, but what was it really? And is it something that you're going to use to benefit your life, or explore more things about yourself? Or is it something you're just going to keep to yourself and think, hey, this is how I'm going to take advantage of situations? It's all just very fascinating as I get older, because I watch people operate from these points of view. And some people are just working in random, and that's totally fine. I understand that that's how they want to go about their experience here on the physical plane. But it makes for, like, obviously interesting conversations as we're just talking about this right now.
Absolutely. And, too, all of our approaches, because we are all, universal expressions of this life force, we are going to have variable approaches of how we experience life. Some people are going to have more of that Aries approach of like, let's just do this. Some people are going to have a Virgo approach, and they're going to calculate where they're going to go, where they're going to stay the first night, how they're going to get a taxi from this place. Where like the Aries is just like, I'll figure it out. I'm just going to adapt to it. So we have these different variations of how we experience these kind of, these things. And I love what you're kind of saying, because it just all comes back to like, well, what did you learn? All roads lead to Rome, return on me, and that's what this whole experience is about, is to learn ourselves. And so it's really the alchemical lens that we're developing, and I think has been fortified through this more intense study and then further application of these principles, is being able to extract the alchemical gold out of any situation. What we perceive as good or bad in the moment, we really can't judge. Like, you really can't judge in the moment whether something is a positive or a negative, because it's like, well, who am I going to be from this experience? Like when I was going through the most depressive, even suicidal times in my life, I was like, this is a bad spot I'm in. I'm in a really bad space. Like, I'm like, really, like, I would have to truly, I would have to convince myself, be like, you can kill yourself tomorrow. I was like, do that. Like, don't worry, you can always kill yourself tomorrow. Like, that was like where my mindset was. But that mindset and that hole and that cave I buried for myself and was burying myself in was the catalyst for my exploration of alchemy. Because I was like, I'm either going to take my own life, or I could try this alchemy thing. And I did. And I had to go step by step through it, because I didn't have a religious upbringing. I had a very scientific, historical awareness of what this reality is, but I had no idea about the cause of it. I was hypnotized by the 5 sense reality. And, I really thought that logic was the champion, and it truly is just it's a tool, but the universe is definitely one step beyond logic. And so by going through the alchemical process and climbing myself out of that depressive, hole, I was able to fortify an understanding of it that's allowed me to explain it and help other people explore the process of transmutation in their life. And so, we get these amazing emails from our listeners, and they're just like, your study of alchemy opened up that awareness, and it truly saved my life. And so it's so funny when I reflect on my life, I'm so grateful for that depression, because if it wasn't for that depression, I would have never approached alchemy. I would have never approached the meaning of life, and I would have never been able to do that. And so, it's just a fascinating thing. God is in all things. It's in all spaces. It's in all matter. It's in the space in between. And so, you really can truly find God in the line of a grocery store. Every moment has an experience for character growth and deeper understanding of who we are and what we're operating in this reality. It's just the, really turning on that alchemical awareness and that spiritual perspective of seeing the magic beyond this reality, to be able to incorporate and, instill the lessons that are always presenting themselves to us.
Oh, yeah. And well said, man. I was very captivated by what you were saying. And thanks for sharing that, because I didn't know when you were going through that process of depression, but I honestly couldn't tell, because I felt like you were always fortifying yourself. When I would talk to you, you wouldn't bring me down, you were like, hey, and maybe you were using those moments to say, oh, I haven't seen Eduardo in a minute, and I'm going to talk to him, and I want to know more about what's going on in his life and see how he's approaching his life. And then I might say something about what's going on in my life personally that's a difficult period, and you can relate to it, and your heart is open to it because you were going through that motion. And I always think that made you very wise, because you weren't shutting off to a point where you were like, I don't really need to, give him empathy. My situation is much more worse than his. You are always like, hey man, I'm sorry if that's what's happening, but you're a good person. I think things will work out. And but I think you were able to say that without sounding fake, because you were still exploring, going through that process. And it might already been the process of success for yourself already after. You already might have been buried in some books going, and then when you meet with me, going to the point of explaining maybe something that would help me out eventually, and then hopefully in turn help you out. And that's kind of what I get out of, honestly, to all the listeners listening right now. That's the most fulfilling thing, that you think that I have anything important to say that helps you out, but I think you're helping yourself out. That's my experience right now, is that you're choosing to make a decision to find ways to deal with either a situation that is causing pain physical pain, confusion, doubt, all these words that we have out there. I mean, they exist for a reason, right? These are emotional pingings that happen to us that are hard to navigate, I think. And I think no one has it easy. I just think that people get curious enough to go, okay, enough is enough. These waves are pushing me, and they're going to keep pushing me no matter what. How do I get out of the way? Either I go all the way in where the water is more calm, or I walk back to the shoreline and reassess. And there's just kind of this moment where I think this literature is what kind of gets us there. I think that people oftentimes look for not just an experience that's really negative to bring themselves back to the light, but as of lately, it kind of feels that way. As of lately, it feels like people are pushing to see what pushes back because they want to be pushed back. They just don't know how to go about it. And these distractions and the loops you're talking about of just making us sort of hypnotized do keep us from really exploring what the edge looks like and how to turn around and go a different way. Yeah, I don't know.
There has been such a fabricated direction pointed to the idea of, identification with this component of matter, and only matter matters, and there's no cause to the matter. And this is a dead planet. You're going to get buried, YOLO kind of thing, right? And this whole experience is just to gain power and gain money, right? Which we understand that those are components of this reality. We need to be able to provide food, water, and shelter for ourselves. But is it the purpose of this reality? And that's something that we truly have been kind of deceived on and led astray. But again, we kind of consented to that. And that's why the universe is responding the way it is. And as a collective, the more of our internal shadows that are not, explored and incorporated with and actually, infused into us and like making that marriage happen of our own inner darkness, the more it gets projected in the shared reality. There's this component of like, we started the episode with like coming live from the apocalypse, but there is a reason to why everything is inverted at this moment in our reality. And it's because the tree of life, which serves love, truth, and wisdom, is not getting the ample energy from our creative components of who we are. We're not feeding the tree of life. We're feeding the tree of death. We're feeding the tree of fear. We're feeding the tree of polarization. It's truly like separating us from that universal life force that animates and actually is the cause of this experience. And this is why our reality is so upside down right now. And it's only going to get weirder in the external. And that's just to wake you up to, you have to find the inner guide, which is your heart. Because your heart is the only thing that's going to navigate us through this experience. Because, one of the things with like the age of Aquarius, and we're going to kind of speak about this with the Chariot card, so I don't want to go too deep into it, but, we use our senses to navigate this reality, right? Like sense of like smell, vision, hearing. But we've even spoke about this in the past. Your senses are limited. There's a light spectrum of colors between ultraviolet and infrared of the colors that you can actually like perceive in your consciousness, right? Same thing with hearing. There's sounds that you can't hear, but they're still operating and they're still happening in this reality. We're probably only aware of like 1% of this hologram that we're experiencing of the soul and the body. So there's a lot of things that our senses can't actually, bring into our party. So we know that the senses are limited, but even like as we move through this age of Aquarius, our senses and their ability to validate the moment and experience that we're in is actually going to get amplified in its ability to deceive us. Like we speak about the idea of like AI technology, we speak about the idea of like holograms, and you can actually like make something look like it's real. Like you can almost put like fake aliens out and people would literally think that they're seeing aliens, right? Like we have this technology, and that's in accordance with the age of Aquarius. Deep fakes, right? Like you can literally put your face, like a face of a celebrity on somebody and make it look like it's that true person. Well, there's nothing wrong with this technology because it's the age of Aquarius. Technology is just a tool. But our hearts need to come online more because we need to start feeling, because we can't just trust our senses. You know, like think about the experience that we're having right now with like our Instagram. And we have that individual who's making the fake accounts and he's messaging people to solicit, money, donations, romantic connections, all of these things that he's doing. Visually, if you were just relying on your senses, you'll be like, oh, these two know thyself guys are kind of creepy. They're kind of like, this is interesting. Like they're kind of like begging me and kind of harassing me for money. Well, what we need to do now is, okay, this is what my senses are giving me. How do I feel about this situation? Do I feel like these guys would message me with a bunch of emojis saying that our energies were connected by like the 2 pictures I have up on Instagram and like trying to solicitate like me giving them money so I could read their, like, do we feel like they would do this? And if we were really in connection with our heart would be like, no, this doesn't feel like these 2 voices that I've been listening to. And we could devalidate and like actually put the sense awareness in its correct perspective of like, no, this is not in alignment with truth. So we don't act accordingly. So it's that marriage that happens, and the heart is the validator of our thoughts as they're coming in, and it can really let you know what is real. But even with the heart, it takes so much healing because we're not in the experience of like feeling through the OG and that universal life force in the beginning. We feel the me, the my ego, and everything's like an emotional, personal reaction of like, oh, they offended me or they did this. Well, like nobody can actually do anything to you. You have to give people permission to do stuff to you. And so even like with this healing, and we get connected to this like universal life force and this connection, we can kind of get this real guide. But this is going to be so important for the future because the matrix, this cube inside the cube, the matrix is crumbling. And so they need to refortify it. And so that means that the carnal carnival and the circus is going to get louder. It's going to get flashier, and it's going to entice us more to continue to operate within it. But we're at this like conscious, crossroad right now of like, what are you going to choose? Are you going to choose the matrix, or are you going to choose, the cosmic classroom, which is this universe and its nature, and aligning ourselves back with nature? And so, that you wrote a really good article on the blog that I don't know if the blog is on the new website, but it was on the old website, but it was about turning your light on. And that's what we're really experiencing here is like, we need to turn on our emotional connection to the all-knowing mind so we can actually validate what we're experiencing from this 5-sense reality. Because, there's a reason why, like if somebody's trying to like sell you something and trying to like rip you off, they don't stop talking. Because they have to keep talking so you don't have that one moment to feel, is this person telling me the truth? Because if you feel, they're gonna get recognized as, a snake, that they're trying to take advantage of you and they're selling you snake oil because that feeling component. So this is again why we try to wake up the heart so much, because the heart is what validates and, can actually like say if our thought is correct or not. But it's a process. And that's why we go through this healing process of sitting with the emotions, healing, changing our relationships to things, and really kind of regaining the responsibility of creation and our role in creation, and responsibility for like, hey, the only way I'm going to make it out of this, this 5-sense reality is kind of by my own damn accord of like learning the reason why I'm here and what I need to do.
Saying, and yes, I agree. I want to go back to, you're just nailing it with certain, I have to write these things down, but you're just nailing with certain phrases that are just exactly how, it's been to operate from my perspective with my life. And that's changing your thoughts, changing how you approach life constantly is, we have that choice. We have a way of seen through the facade. And you also said something about how it's only going to get more weird. It's exactly right. I mean, I don't operate on like a social media level where I'm involved in a lot of, text posts where there's an exchange between people, and then there's trolling and all that kind of involvement. Could be, certain applications that exist out there that people use on a daily. It could be news headlines and people write their opinion on it. But I know it's all noise because the art of conversation with a physical human is so small now, and it's so wide on an electronic base that we are having to learn how to navigate between what sounds like it's a facade or what sounds to be, just some kind of discussion that's very shallow and has no depth to it. And so much to the point of the people who are gravitated towards, or people are pulled right now, I should say, even to things like podcasts for a good reason. People are like, okay, I need to find some kind of source of what it's like to be that person on the other side, and see if there's relatable content. And people have been surprised, because before, when you would hear someone come on air, it was either by an industry that controlled it, so they got to publish what needed to go out there to your ears, and that could be a movie, and that could be a radio host. I mean, you needed to have an idea of what it not only meant to be a radio host, but have even kind of a way of entertaining people without there being, this sort of freedom to speak the way we speak now. So there's a reason for why we gravitate towards these things now, because there is no agenda. It's just two people having a conversation, and you were invited to listen. And furthermore to that is that when you do listen, you might find content that makes you sort of adjust and sigh a little bit of relief, or have a breath of noticing that, hey, what they're saying about these people over here may not be true, because what I'm hearing them say, I feel the same way about that. And that is a way of speaking with your heart, is what you're kind of talking about. And I've actually operated on this level for the last, I'd say at least 2 years, especially when I went freelancing, because freelancing requires for you to, not only be involved in people's lives when they contract you, and in my case with video work, but the most important thing is like trying to be not a salesperson you're talking about, being authentic with people, and actually having to operate from a neighborly perspective is what actually got me more work than anything else. It was always a question of the physical that I provided, right? Like, what was so great about what I might have done for you? And they were like, I just like that I could trust you as a breath of fresh air. And if you need work again, I'll definitely call you. I'm like, oh, okay. And then people would ask me, well, what did you do to get to that person? Or how did you end up working with that person? I'm like, apparently it just paid off to be good and operate from my heart, and that's just what I'm going to continue doing. And it's what I've done for a long time. And of course there's people, there's predators that hide and they lurk, and they're looking for a moment of weakness. And I think that's another problem, is that when you feel like you've been taken advantage of, then you don't operate from that place of goodwill or from the heart, because you think, I've done that before, and it hurts when someone takes advantage of me. But that's going to continue happening your whole life. People are trying to survive, and people are trying to, take something from you that they don't have. But the more you foster, good intentions, I feel like the more you're protected by beings that you can't even see, and or beings that you can see, people who surround you with love. People always say, surround yourself with good people and you'll have good outcomes. People are like, oh, it's not that simple. Like, I've tried making friends, and I understand it's a little more difficult for some, especially for someone as chatty as me, if you're not like me and so open and trustworthy with some individuals. But I've definitely had my experiences that have made me think otherwise. And I feel like that's when the voice kind of comes in, and you have to make a choice to whether listen to that voice or ignore it and say, no, people inherently are good. Just like, babies, when they're born, if they're born into a good environment, I like to think that they're born just with an abundance of love that they want to give, and then they want to reciprocate. And if you can operate from that channel, so I was talking about that magnetic field, I think things just kind of move in a good direction that most people have discovered, but it's always going to be shifting. The way to gain things, whether it's like love or respect, it's always going to be shifting. The platform doesn't stay the same. And that's what we have to be distinguishing along the way at all times, which is why I like these old texts. I like them more and more, not because I'm sitting here studying something so deep that it's blowing my mind. It's just more basic as time goes on, that the form of operating is structured by the universe, not by us finding a hack to it. I think finding a hack is what's going to get you in trouble. I think if you just understand that there's a pattern and there's a vibration, you know, as you've always said, so I think, so I feel, and so I act. And so this pattern that you're sort of following up on definitely is why I like to read about all this information that we are either so specific about, or what you said earlier about our conversations becoming so much more complex, because now people know our disposition in a way. They're like, oh, this is where they're operating from. They're operating from a different level for themselves as another octave, like how we speak to one another, how we make these choices to reach out to one another. Even if it's a vulnerable time in our life, it's helping us out greatly to continue being not just friends, but exploring things that can aid us on ever-changing platforms that I was talking about that are going to challenge us along the way. So
yeah,
I'll stop there.
No,
I feel like I'll keep going.
I love it. No, I love it. It's so true though. When you raise up the octave awareness, you raise up the octave of experience, and you know, you really are putting that pressurization on your character to develop into that gold. You know, diamonds are made by pressure. And when we live in with that intention we've spoke about, it raises the intensity. And it really kind of speeds up the maturation of the self. You know, your ability to develop your highest potential of like character and connecting your higher self with the nurturing of your inner child and finding that trinity, that's a free will decision. You know, you have to make your way, and, you know, because that universal life force that is all things and all spaces loves you so much unconditionally that it does not impose itself on you. It's just always just right there. But once you make that movement to it, we spoke about, it's like a quickening and it meets you in the middle. But, you know, learning that there is a hierarchy of actions, that, you know, the vibration of love is it's a higher frequency and a higher vibration than hate and fear. One of the big things that when we moved from the meaning of life to the motion of life, we surrendered the hierarchy of actions and experiences to equality. And now we know, as spiritual individuals, all humans are equal, right? We are all just the incarnation and the housing unit of this God life force. Not regardless of what the country says, like who we're allowed to hate at that time, who we're not allowed to hate at that time. It has nothing to do with their little puppet show, because it's just a puppet show, you know. And truly, you know, if you look at a politician, they're either controlled by strings or they've got literally a corporation's hands like up their butt controlling their mouth, right? Like we know, we can see the puppet show. And again, this isn't a political thing, it's a spiritual thing. But, you know, so we know that humans are equal, but in the actions that human can take, there is a definite hierarchy. You know, acting through love is going to vibrate the experiences of more love, truth, and wisdom into your life. Operating through deceit, you know, operating through like a narcissistic idea, yeah, you're going to attract friends that are using you, you know, because that's what you're putting out. Like attracts like. And so as we make these higher choices of our actions and through our thoughts and our emotions, and when they're aligned and we create, you know, the sacred child, which is our creation, you're right. The more we pull into our life of true value, rather than just material things. So yeah, maybe if you worked in more of the mode of deception, and maybe you did kind of like raise your prices and give out a lower quality thing, yeah, maybe you would have a little bit more money in your physical bank account, but your spiritual bank account would be depleted. Your emotional bank account would be depleted. You know, we're collecting other currencies than just the physical currency of the monetary exchange in this reality. You know, everything is coming back to us, and we're truly like making deposits and withdrawals from those accounts at all times. And so when you operate on that higher level of truth, love, and wisdom, you truly become a lighter individual because you're releasing the lead and you're not getting controlled by competition. The lead get led. It's right in our language, divorcing yourself from, the sheeple and the sheep race and the idea of competition. Cause like we have nothing to compete against each other with. We have nothing to judge each other against. That's not our role here. Our role is to learn ourselves and to grow as individuals and to help the evolution of love, truth, and wisdom. It's an expansion among the human network. And so, you operating in that way has ramifications beyond both of our knowing. We don't understand how important every action is in accordance to our thoughts and our emotions. Like the universe truly holds its breath when we make decisions, because the fate of the universe, the fate of this like galaxy that we're in is dependent on humans. Like if we go into such a black hole of narcissism and disconnecting from the truth of what reality is and ignoring natural law, we're going to create a black hole because that's what we became with our consciousness. That's what we created. And so your actions have cosmic importance. You are the most important thing in the world, and so is everybody else. Gaining that responsibility of like what you're assisting. And so when you operate through love, you're setting waves into motion that are going to influence the future and assist this true cosmic plan of oneness in ways that you could never even know. And truly, as your friend, I've seen how you have approached this in life. Like it was a complete transition from like right when you were like 16, 17. It was like right when we got reconnected in high school because we were really close in middle school. And then of course you were the most popular person in high school. So you were hard to get, your attention. But then in 12th grade, we reconnected, right? In zoology. And it was really interesting because I remember that day I walked in and I saw you and I didn't sit next to you at first because I was just like, oh no, Eddie's really cool. Like he's probably got other, and you were like, you looked at me and you're like, what are you doing? There's an open seat right here. And it was like that moment when I was just like, oh, this is awesome. I remember when I reconnected with you, there was this empathetic part of you that was just like so aware and so dedicated to like seeing where I was emotionally, seeing where I was and how I was feeling about life, asking me about my plans after school. Like there was this like awareness about you that has only just been fostered ever since then. And you really are, when I speak to people about the podcast, like it's just like always when I explain what our relationship is and how we got on this part of like speaking about this is like, I study it, Eddie lives it. Like Eduardo just lives this. And then when you study, it's just like language to living this experience. But, you truly have really kind of expressed this through your actions of living to this higher quality of life. And it truly is. There is a hierarchy of the choices that we can make. I know occultists get so upset,
Thanks, man.
About, saying the term good or bad. And we've kind of expressed that, like, it's like a hard time to subjectively do, but like you nurturing your plant with like Mountain Blast Mountain Dew and like putting it in a closet, that's a bad way to nurture a plant. It's not going to get the nourishment. Right. It's not going to grow up strong. You raise your child without any kind of boundaries, discipline, strength, or awareness of other people. That child is going to create a cycle and pattern that's not going to be beneficial. And it's going to have to go through a lot of healing later on in its life to get connected to truly what this reality is. So there is a right and wrong when it comes to components of like how we operate. And really what it is there's a level of expression that happens. And the more we get connected to our heart, the higher octaves of our thoughts come in. It literally changes the frequency of where our thoughts come in because our thoughts are like a train, right? They're always constant, but the octave and the level of your thoughts is in complete alignment with your heart. And so when you start feeling that I don't want to talk to myself in like a self-defeating way, and you feel it and you act on that and you're like, I'm not going to think about that, your thoughts literally like raise up an octave, and that thought doesn't come in anymore, And so this is why we're always going through this evolution, and always kind of going through this experience. And so I know I just gave you a bunch of flowers, but I truly mean that, man. It's always been such a remarkable inspiration,
Cool, man.
because you do live it, and it shows with like the love that you brought into your life and these experiences that like even the future has for you.
That's super nice of you to say, man. I know you've met a lot of like pretty unique individuals on your journey, so like I don't take that lightly when you say that. I think it's funny how you're like, that you say that I live it. I guess the choice of living it is because of what you said about in regards to darkness and looking for the light and looking for this information. And I think that's why I gravitated to you even more back in 12th grade, because I think that's when we started talking a lot about the occult, because we were able to find a different path to something that I was saying earlier that people might find along the way, and that might be religion. It's like, hey, I've had this experience where pain was so severe or it was so abundant that I had to turn to something, and that might be to a book, and that might be to a deity, that might be to a philosophy. But I think you and I, as we are right now, 20 years ago, we were like, why not all of it? Like, bring it on. Like, what is all of it? How do people motivate themselves? What are they motivated by? I think we were coming into this idea of, what looks like cheap and what looks to be, to have some sort of density, less is more, all of these things that we would kind of take in, we sort of brought to or incorporate into our conversations or brought into our life. And again, not to like do a ping pong match and give it back to you, but I felt the same way about you, because there were times in my life where I wanted to surrender to basic things that don't have a purpose in order to feel some kind of normal pattern. And I remember connecting with people that I used to think were shallow. And for those who might listen that I'm talking about, I don't think you're shallow now. It was just an idea of a pattern you were on, or at least a path you were on, that I decided to join in. This could be like college parties. And I mean, I never really went hard on a college party, but I definitely enjoyed myself with friends, and I enjoyed myself watching them enjoy themselves. And I was like, I wish I could be as free as they are in this moment and to care so much about the school's mascot, but I can't, and I just don't feel it. And I think it's all a facade. And all it was doing is robbing me from like having an experience I'll never have again with certain friends. That's all. So I kind of started focusing my energy towards that, but I always kept one foot in that other door, and that door was always open with you, where I could look at you and say, do you see what I'm seeing? You're like, oh yeah, shallow people, man. And I'm like, oh, sweet. Hey, I'll come connect with you later in this party. And you're like, sweet, man, let's connect later. And you weren't calling anyone shallow. What you're saying is just like, hey, I can't boogie oogie as easily as some of these people right now, knowing that, there's other problems, conflicts in the world, things we've seen in our travels, things you've seen as like maybe a teacher, or what you might have thought of the education system. You had a lot of powerful thoughts that I don't think you ignored, just for like stepping into the facade. I think you were able to enjoy yourself as well. I know we had a couple of good times back when we were in the university, but I know that you always kept that integrity, and that's something that I needed more than anybody needed it in that moment for myself, was that to know someone else is also wondering, like, is this the way to behave? Is this the way we should like consume? Is this the way we should like enjoy? Are you enjoying yourself? Hey, I'm here next to you, you would say. So I'm enjoying myself. I'm like, that was beautiful. That was so sweet what he just said. Because like, he didn't say like, I love the fact that we're in college and that we're doing this one thing. You were like, no, man, I'm just glad I'm standing right here next to you. And I'm like, cool. Then we are operating from like a very core level that I hope at least other people can find with all this noise, the circus, the carnival, the things that we've talked about in these last 2 episodes, that I think are going to just keep getting louder and louder. I think they're going to become more and more disturbing, and I think they're going to become more prevalent no matter what. But as long as you can find the core or the path of truth, in our case was like friendship and consideration, then those 2 macro words, they work within many of the things that we discuss here, including what we're going to do when we get to the chariot with the major arcana, getting to that number 7. Like, we're going to bring all of this into full circle of what it means to lose yourself and then find yourself again and then operate from a higher perspective, you know? And I'm not saying I'm always operating from a higher perspective. I'm just glad I can explore these things beyond the noise with you. And so thank you so much. And again, I'm not trying to ping pong and pass it all over to you, but like you've done some things with studying and application that I was able to feel very comforted by. Because it'd be one thing if you were telling me this information, hey, I read this really great book by this really great author, or I, started doing these like nightly walks, listening to these lectures. The thing that stuck out to me the most is I'm like, you do nightly walks? And you're like, oh yeah, most definitely. I was like, dude, you're so mysterious. What do you mean nightly walks? You're like, oh, can't go to sleep, 12 o'clock. I just take a walk out into the moonlight. And it's a good time to actually like think and sort of sort out your thoughts. I'm like, man, that's awesome. I was like, I got to do something like that as well. Or you would get up really early and you weren't preaching about it. You weren't trying to, make a podcast out of it, and you weren't trying to be a motivational speaker. You just had your way of doing things that I was like, man, he knows himself better than I think other people do and knows what works for him for himself. And I'm like, I respect that. And so I think a lot of these people who share this information, that's all they're looking for. It's like what works for them in order to like find not only a purpose, but also find one that, has a way of reciprocating and contributing to the universe in a positive and non-manufactured way. You know what I mean? But we're definitely going to battle through this for a long time, because you think that by posting something or doing something along those lines, including even our own podcast, you're going to get this reciprocating feedback, but the feedback is given back to you by digital and not analog. You know what I mean? And I think that we need to find more of that analog in our life. And I think you're going to see a lot of it, including in entertainment, But again, I'm going off on a tangent here. So back to you, sir.
Hey, my man. Absolutely. No. And it has been a very interesting experience, because when you kind of think about the path, and you think about getting caught into loops, I was so curious for knowledge, but I couldn't find the true knowledge that like spoke to me. So I was doing it through psychology. I was doing it through philosophy, but lacking that spiritual connection, because at that time I was a proclaimed atheist, right? Which is so funny, because I was anything but an atheist. Because if I was in a lot of trouble, I would start praying. And so I was such a poser atheist. Well, all atheists are posers, because like, because I honor their intellect. Awesome. I honor their intellect, but just because you can't identify what God is, because you can't separate, because it's everything, they get into the loop of being like, oh, he doesn't exist because I can't isolate it and be like, well, what is God, And again, no offense to atheist, but there is this component of limiting your reality, and you get caught in a loop because you get into these mental problems and you try to solve it on the mental landscape. Well, you can't solve a problem on the, the thought of the pattern of thinking that created it. You have to rise above it. And that was what was so, life-changing about connecting to that universal life force and that awareness of there's a bigger pattern operating here, and I'm not just going to die and go to the ground. I'm not a cockroach, which was so interesting because that was programmed into me by the universities. We're just a plague, and then like, and it was just like this interesting thing of like this experience of like just how much indoctrination we get. And as we go, we even learn through like even the senses of what was like uploaded into our software in our hard drive as a child was not completely aligned with the truth. And, you think about the garbage that we were kind of fed in the school system and like the absolute garbage that these children are being fed.
Yes,
there's going to be so much healing that's going to need to be done. And I do think that these children have an awareness to feel that like, I think they see the circus for what the circus is. And I think that they are going to liberate from this, but we are doing such an injustice to them by the inversion that we're teaching. And again, it's not a political thing. It's a spiritual thing. We're talking about the evolution of souls. So it's both political, like whatever your fake, wing of the bird that you want to like attach yourself to, this is not even a conversation on that. it's a conversation on, how do we spiritually help the evolution of consciousness? And when you like look at what we're getting presented in our reality and just the inversion of it, I mean, even the compartment of like, and so, we see this kind of inversion of like even what's being presented, because there was like and again, it's like the news, so you don't even know what's even real, but there is this push to ban like after school clubs, if they are Christian based. So like the school can't have a Christian club, but they can have a club on Satanism. Now, again, this is not like forcing kids to go to this, but it's okay for the school to have a club on Satanism, which I think they should. Like everybody should be able to have their space to express what their beliefs are, right? As long as they're not imposing it on somebody. So this is a voluntary club that children can go, but the schools have banned Christianity clubs, and they only are like, but Satanism is okay. And like, it's even funny of like, even as I go around, like, because I'm like living in this new place, and like I go around on like, I was like exploring 4th Avenue in Tucson, right? Which is kind of like the art kind of area. And it's just so interesting with like how the artists are like glorifying Satanism. It's like on all of their art now, and they're getting promoted to put Satanism. Well, again, that's totally fine if that's your expression. But for the idea that like, an actor can no longer like express their religious views with Christianity, they'll get canceled. But, it's not a weird thing that like people do music videos with Satanism, and they literally talk about like selling their soul to the Lord of Matter. Again, I'm not saying that Satanism shouldn't be explored. Like you should explore Satanism to understand like why you don't operate in that way. And you should explore Satanism in connection with Luciferianism, so you understand that you're getting played by the Luciferians because you're just the puppets of the Luciferians as the Satanists, right? You should explore all these topics. I'm not saying we don't let people explore those, but we need to allow the space for everybody. Like the idea that it's to like mention God is controversial, but to praise the devil is not. You're seeing this inversion of everything, and we've inverted everything, like even with like the roles of like where we even stand in culture. And that's great that we're like having this interconnection, but we're losing the fabric of what ties this reality to nature. And as nature has less of an influence in how we operate, well, get your umbrella, because I hear that that's the flood. And, it happens. The flood, and like the biblical flood or any other major catastrophe, is very much an operation when the pH level of humanity gets too acidic. And so, everybody's on their phones, and what does phone break down to? pH 1, the lowest level of the pH. And we could just kind of even see as we come more and put more of our energies and consciousness in external things, we're losing the one thing that has like actually, is our guide, which is our heart and our awareness to the ultimate teacher, which is Mother Nature.
No, fascinating things what you're saying about, where things are changing culturally speaking, even, and what you're seeing that, we should definitely do an episode on what canceling really means in our society right now. I think that a lot of people are talking about how it's, dangerous, but we haven't talked about why it's dangerous and what it means to cancel things and what it means to sort of, take your energy as a collective, which is a great thing when it's done for greater things, that is, for something that is needed in our universe, something that a collective can do in order to contribute, and is just making a bunch of noise that you're being asked to make noise about, and I think that there are real issues out there. I think people do need to be defended. I know you've seen things in the classroom when it comes to children and how they operate and how they go about things, but there's also a way to sort of take a step back and understand what these, what these either news headlines or things that are being suggested to us, if there really are a problem or not a problem, and how we can solve them together, and I think that when we talk about the chariot, we're going to bring up a lot of that. We're going to bring a lot about what it means to be able to steer those two levels of consciousness that can, take us the direction we want to go to, away from the noise, away from the city. And this will all make more sense when we do the chariot. But I think it's fascinating with this conversation, how it started, man, just based on like what we talked about before we started recording about the way we communicate, you and I, and how we are going to find a new way to break down these topics over time and have a longer conversation about each of the topics that we introduce along the way in season 3 with terms of application, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, finding a balance between, expressing information and like esoteric conversation between two subjective individuals in this collective objective reality. And I think we're kind of creating space for both. Like we were speaking about, like what today was really just like, there's going to be episodes that are just kind of the pulse of consciousness. What is the zeitgeist of the moment that we find ourselves in? Because we speak about presence, and then we speak about the past, usually on this podcast, And so what are we experiencing in this shared reality to gain more of a understanding of how do we operate in the here and now? How do we activate this higher awareness and this more divine perspective to experience it like the classroom that it is, because everything is going to be on the test and we're always getting tested. And, we are falling to deception about like who we truly are. And the universe is going to allow these individuals to deceive us because we've consented to their information. We've taken their information as fact. We take what the scientific institutions and the think tanks tell us is factual, and we just openly accept it. We allow the news to say that like people are outraged in the suburbs of Phoenix because somebody put, Islamic flag on their house. But like, the person put the flag up 5 minutes ago. Who did you talk to? Who's outraged? Like, why did we get deceived by reading that? And we just accepted it like, oh, wow, the community in West Phoenix is really outraged. But then, like, if you would go talk to the neighbors, they're like, I don't give a shit about his flag. Like, unless he's like changing my flag of the flag I raise, like, he's fine. Like, we get so influenced by direction outside of ourselves. Well, like you don't bend your knee to anybody. You have to operate this as a sovereign individual. And it's when we start taking our consent away from patterns that we didn't even know that we were attributing our energy to. Because like ultimately, it's like truly like the Garden of Eden, which is paradise, and the Garden of Getting Eaten is phonetically similar, because you have the most valuable thing in the universe, which is your life force, creative potential. You are the most valuable thing in the world. The most valuable thing in the universe is your creative component. These individuals are not playing for power. They're not playing for money. They're playing for souls. Like they're playing to control the infinite potential of the human possibility. And you are the most valuable thing in the world. And so when you think about that idea of like, well, why would this facade in this fake matrix be so created? Because like, it's the ultimate generation of power. You're giving them your life force energy. You're giving them literally your gift, right? God-given, responsibility and capacity to be a creator in this realm, and you're surrendering it. And it's not something to be surrendered. It's something to be, spiritualized in yourself and expressed through your highest accord. Like, again, I heard a quote and I kind of mentioned it on the other podcast recently, but like thieves don't break into empty houses. Like they wouldn't spend so much time creating this circus if it wasn't worth it. The juice is way worth the squeeze to them, because they're creating the reality and you're buying it and you're like accepting it. And so a big part of the spiritual responsibility is taking back our God-given right of creation and being like, no, I'm responsible for what I create. And I'm no longer going to just, surrender my ability to direct what I experience in this universe to the accord of, some sort of statue of like a facade of what like the true, source of life is.
Correct. Correct, man. And I do agree that I know we kind of already talked about it, but how it's going to, be more and more difficult to understand how to navigate through this is what I want to continue doing with all the lectures. And something you said earlier about when you talk about thieves and like what they're gonna, what they're going after, is something that I know is dark, but the soul is such a valuable thing that I think we've kind of not taken for granted. I can't speak for everyone. I just see it a lot where people are just like, it's just about the numbers, it's about the work, and it's about the output, but no one's considering the input, and what the output is, creating when the input isn't being considered. You know what I mean? It's like if you're getting this information and you're putting this information back out, these are the things that are creating our world right now as we speak, and you're just doing it out of moving so quickly because the options are so quickly. I mean, technology, when people think of the word technology, sometimes I do wonder if they're just referring to the idea of, is it quicker, faster, and easier to access? Because that's really what it comes down to. It's not so much, you can get into the nuances of what technology means. It's now 4K, it's 6K, it's 8K, and then what does that mean? Oh, it's pixelations. But pixelations, what does it really mean? Well, it means it's a sharper image, and it's like, oh, it's a sharper image because we want to get closer to creating a fantasy into a reality, and it looks good when we do that, and we're becoming more accustomed to that. But it's like, hold on, slow down. Just because you can doesn't mean we should, in terms of moving so fast with the options and buttons we have to touch. You know what I mean? Like, why are you going to touch that? And how are you going to move that is something that you should be asking. I think those questions are kind of just disappearing and becoming more of like if you want to, you can explore it. But if you don't want to, no one's going to be mad at you. And then people just watch the repercussions happen and go, I could have warned him, but I didn't because it's on him. Or it's on her, or it's on them, on what they want to focus on. And there's just no accountability. And I think that I just think it just goes back to the collective in an unfulfilling way that people then feel like contributes to their outlook on life if they're looking at it from a perspective of it being a bad place to be. It's like, oh, look at the world we live in. It's just noise, and it's a lot of contamination and a lot of garbage. But we have a control over the input at times, and it may not have a control over all of the input, but those choices we make are definitely going to affect the world around us regardless. And I think that that's all we have is those choices. Anytime that I've ever brought up Marcus Aurelius that's really, or even any of the Stoic philosophers that come up on this podcast, it's just really just understanding how they use discipline to make those choices and why they were so disciplined to make those choices. Even if you would think, well, they didn't have as much chaos coming at them. It's like, oh, they had a lot of chaos. It was just a different means of what made them move and made them participate in sort of that cardinal way, and that sort of like more of the flesh and the physical and the hierarchies. They were different on how they were approached, but they were all coming from the same place. And so, anyways, I am so excited to talk about the chariot because of all of this, man. I think it's going to really have this. We're going to have this fluid conversation about the chariot that we haven't been able to have because we haven't really stepped out of just giving a point of view on something we've learned and then exchanged on. This is more of our own experiences and how we operate through those experiences and how we apply the knowledge to those experiences,
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. And there is something so special, and to kind of like close the circuit of today. You could read philosophers from any time. There's nothing new under the sun. It's always the experience of just remembering who you are. And at modes of time, it might have been easier to connect to that spiritual significance, but the struggle against just pure survival was harder. So it was harder to get things like the food, water, and shelter, and there was less stability. But your connection to the source was undeniable. Well, as we get into this automation, as we get into more of this material and this world calcifies, the sensations are easier to come by. If somebody wants to see a naked photo of somebody, they can just pull out their phone. It's instantaneous. Where in the past, I remember my grandfather telling me once that he was he was like hanging out with girls when he was younger and they were jumping rope and he saw their knee and was like overwhelmed by it. And it's just like, oh, wow. Like we are so desensitized to that now. Because like it is like the access to desire satisfaction is what we have to actually face. Like the ancients or maybe past civilizations had to deal with like physical survival. It's survival of your awareness. It's like, yeah, we talked about it today. It's like, direction of your attention is the survival that we need to do, and understanding that like you have a responsibility to direct where you put that active consciousness and your attention. And we can see what happens when we surrender it, and we watch the watch and we get hypnotized by time. And that's why, when you're watching Netflix, it's like, are you still watching? It's meaning like, are you still hypnotized? And we're like, yeah. And like, give me another episode of Parks and Rec. And it's just like, here it comes, buddy. And it just like fills you in, and like, again, like our accessibility to sensation, our accessibility to dopamine drips is making us, not as focused, directed, and persevering through resistance to accomplish things, because we can get that dopamine endorphin drip from, something that's in the palm of our hands. And, that drip is supposed to be by the completion of things and, the overcoming of things, not just by like, again, it's like kind of that thing of like watching somebody restore a car. And then you have this feeling like you restored the car. You didn't do shit. You sat on your couch and you watched that person. Now, if you like want to experience that and that inspires you, great. But if you take that in as somebody else's accomplishment as like fulfilling you, well, now you're disassociated by actually like, well, what were you supposed to create? Did you literally get brought to this universe? Your meaning of life was to, watch influencers and just, like totally be jealous and envy them for their like material like accomplishments. It's like, I don't think so. I think there's like a disconnection there. And so, we do that, man. We're working on that journey, and that's why we have these conversations. And, we're just so grateful for the wisdom that the universe has bestowed on us and speaks through us, because we're just like the copper wire that comes through. And that's the same with all artists. It's just you're a conductor of the universal life force as it speaks through you. But the more you take out blocks in your current, the more you take blocks out in your tree of life, the more that energy flows through you, the more it can speak to you, and the more you can feel connected to it and realize that you have a personal relationship, because it is you and you are it. I and I.
I and I like that. Well said, man. Well, if there's anything else you want to add, I know I can keep going. This conversation for the listeners started because Daniel was asking me how I was doing, just genuinely asked me how I was doing. We had a great conversation about it, and then somehow we started started moving towards, the action component to how we're going about life. And then the comparisons started coming up, and then he's like, hey, you know what? We should really talk about this openly to our listeners, but also on the podcast, because again, the more you get to know, where we're coming from, and I think for those who listen for a long time, maybe they already do, but the more you get to know where we're coming from, it's just like, we're just trying to foster nothing but good energy, love, and prosperity to those who need it, and those who already have it, just maybe express that sharing it isn't all that bad of a thing to do, and that's what I hope for the most for people. And for those who are suffering, I'm sorry. And for those who are having a great life, don't take it for granted. I try not to every day, I try not to get caught up in the idea of a rat race of some kind, or the, monetization of like material wealth, or trying to find, the accumulation, I should say, not monetization, the accumulation of material wealth. And so that's all I want to continue doing on this path with you, man. And of course, talking about why these topics are so important in terms of understanding them, interpreting them, and then applying them. So with the chariot next, I can't wait, because I know we already have quite a bit of material on it. And I can't wait to open up that conversation with you, man.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely, man. So excited to explore that with you. And just like always, biggest thanks. And we're eternally grateful for the members, the listeners, anybody who shares the podcast. And Anybody who openly has a conversation with Eduardo and I when we're doing this, because I know when I connect to people on natal charts, they're always like, I literally like talk to you guys and I'll pause it. And I say my part and then I like start it again. And then they're like, a lot of times that's like how the other one responds to
awesome.
it. And that truly is.
Oh my gosh. I want to be in that room.
Oh, it's so true. And like, this is a universal experience. And, even we spoke about this in the past, but like what these conversations are for is like, if you have another individual that's listening to the podcast, all this does is it's straight to like a starting point. So you guys can just jump in really deep because like, hey, did you listen to the podcast on the High Priestess? And they're like, oh, I did listen to the High Priestess. And so rather than like formulating the foundation, you already both have it. And then you can just go really deep. And so this is just a spark plug. Like this is the hayfire for the inner realizations in yourselves. And again, I speak to each and every one of you all the time through natal charts and alchemical counseling. Like you all have the third seat of this podcast. Like you're in it with us. And like even what comes through us is so inspired by you guys. And so it's just such an honor to be on this journey with each and every one of you. And words can never put into the happiness and the joy that this experience has brought. I know to myself, and I don't want to speak for you, Eduardo, but I am. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's just such an honor to be with each and every one of you on this journey. You too included, you handsome man. Every time I see you, I'm just like, gosh, Eduardo, you are just stunning.
You flatter me too much, man. You flatter me too much. Right back at you, man. And you can't speak for me in that regard of, how much of an honor it is. Because again, you and I would always have these conversations and we'll continue to have these conversations. So it's great that someone would like to take the third seat there, with us. And so I got nothing else more I want to add, or else I'm going to start spilling the beans on the chariot. So until next time.
Until next time.
Okay.